Hello and welcome to Religion and Life. I'm your host, Ozzie. Hope. Hope is a concept that plays an important role in virtually all global religions. In fact, in the Christian tradition, hope is identified as one of the three theological virtues given to human beings by God. But as familiar as the concept seems to be, it's also hard to define and understand. My guest today, Dr. Jack Kwong, is a philosopher who is thinking and writing about hope from a different perspective. Welcome, Dr. Kwong. Thank you. I hope you're doing well today.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Appreciate you coming on the show.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So just introduce yourself for us. Tell us what your areas of interest are in philosophy and maybe a little bit about how you got interested in hope.
Okay. Well, I'm Jack Kwong. I've been here at Appalachian State since 2005, so this will be my 18th, 19th year. I'm interested primarily in epistemology, theory of knowledge, and metaphysics. Before I got into hope, I was researching on the nature of open-mindedness, and I suppose the question that is behind that project is, what can make us better knowers, right? Specifically, what character traits can we cultivate and refine so that we can increase our understanding of the world, we can acquire knowledge. Mm-hmm. So I was really interested in open-mindedness about what it is, right? Its limits, whether we should be open-minded about, let's say, controversial issues or topics. What is a typically open-minded person disposed to do? So these were all questions that I was really interested in answering. But after a few years of looking into that topic, I wanted to see, what other character traits that we can cultivate. And it just so happens that at that time, there was a paper that came out, something like, is hope an intellectual virtue? So in other words, is hope one of these character traits that a person can cultivate to become a better knower?
Right.
I was really interested in that topic, but then as soon as I started looking into it more, I realized I had no idea what hope is, right? So
this is kind of how philosophers work.
That's
right.
right. That's right. So I started looking into the nature of hope, and I've been interested in writing about it ever since, and this was a few years ago.
Yeah, so I enjoyed reading 2 or 3 of your articles about hope, and it really got me to thinking as well that I've taken for granted for many years what hope is in a theological context, but now after reading what you've written on the topic, I'm not sure. I'm having to rethink a lot of things. But is hope a concept that a lot of philosophers are talking about? It sounds like you're breaking some new ground here with your writings.
Yeah, so hope has received a lot of attention recently, and it makes sense because the concept is ordinary, right? Everybody uses it. You see it everywhere.
Right.
As soon as I started researching about hope, you see this term pop up all the time, including driving behind a bus, where it says hope, question mark.
Yeah.
And the philosophers are particularly interested in hope, precisely because of the conditions under which hope is most important, right? Or hope arises. Hope typically arises when we face an uncertain future, right? Mm-hmm. Especially when something is at stake, right? So there's something that we want, right? Some sort of desired outcome, but we're not quite sure whether it will obtain or not, right? So hope is one of these emotions, right, or mental attitude that we have, right, in order to sort of orient us towards these desired outcomes. And philosophers recently have struggled with the definition of hope, right? So the sort of standard understanding of hope, the commonsensical view, is that when we hope for something, we desire it, right? but we also believe that it's possible, right? So I might, I hope that my children will lead happy lives, right? So what that means is that I desire it. I desire them to have happy lives, and I believe that that is a genuine possibility, right? So the technical way of putting that is neither an impossibility nor a certainty, right? So we don't hope for things that are impossible, nor do we hope for things that we're absolutely confident about occurring.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So, so that seems like a pretty good definition of hope.
Yeah.
Until
and by the way, that's the kind of traditional orthodox theological definition of hope, being comprised both of desire and the belief that it's possible that it can come about, and that's how I think hope is generally perceived as a virtue in the tradition.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. But of course, philosophers are very good at poking holes.
There you go.
At
That's right.
these definitions, and the puzzle surrounding hope is really that its definition is too broad, because it also includes people who despair, right? So if you think about someone who despairs about some particular outcome, this person still desires it, still believes that its obtainment is possible, right? But yet, far from being hopeful, right? Far from hoping, they are in fact in despair, right? So the question that many philosophers are interested in, I was interested in, was what sort of further requirements do we need to add to this definition in order to distinguish, people who hope from people who despair.
Yeah. So I'm glad you mentioned despair, and I want to come back to kind of parse out the differences between hope, hopefulness, and despair. But I wanted to look at this image here that I found, just have you look at it and comment on it. Have you ever seen this?
I have not.
It's titled "Hope in a Prison of Despair." It's by Evelyn de Morgan, and late 19th century. Since you're dealing with concepts of hope and despair, I brought it up here because it's a nice piece. It's kind of an allegorical painting, I suppose. But here you have someone who appears to be in despair, and hope holding a lamp, I guess. But as I understand your work, despair is part of hope, right? A corollary of it, in essence.
Yeah. So I well, let me give you a little background to that, right? So like many philosophers interested in hope, I was also chasing after this third requirement, right? What else is needed, in order for someone to be hopeful?
No.
And I came up with this view that what separates the hopeful from the despairing is that people who are hopeful can sort of see a way, right, to their desired outcome, right? So they realize there's this outcome they want, right? But they can at least envision these pathways, right? What I call what ifs, right?
Right.
So what if this happened? What if this happened? Right? You can at least sort of mentally connect yourself to this desired outcome, right? And the image that I was working with was that there's this chasm that separates you from this desired goal, right? So this whatever it is that you want is sort of dangling in your face, right? Making you want it, right? So the hopeful can at least see, can draw mental bridges, right? To bridge that gap. By contrast, the people who are in despair, they can't, right? So all they have is this chasm, right? And this desired outcome in front of them, but they have no way of reaching it, right? They still desire it, but their despair consists in not being able to see how they can bridge that.
Yeah, so I got another slide here that I think this is the way I tried to parse out what you're talking about. So hope, as you say in your article, is polysemous. It has, you're breaking it down into two. Hoping is the part of having a desire for something, right? And that's sort of neutral, correct?
Right.
It's a mental function. And hopefulness is then an attitude toward whatever that object or outcome of desire is.
Yeah.
And you can either be positively disposed toward the possibility of that desire coming about, or have negative attitudes toward it. Is that?
Yeah, that's right. So just to make sense of this this diagram here, right? I was just telling you that I have this pathway account, right? And just to go back to something I said before, like I have this theory, right? But I keep seeing hope pop up everywhere. So every time I see this word, like I think I was watching Saturday Night Live and someone used the word hope. And I was like, yeah, can my theory explain that? And there were a few instances where my theory didn't work, right? It didn't even make sense to speak of pathways, right? When the word hope was used. But at the time, I didn't expect my theory to be perfect, so I just sort of forgot. I just sort of ignored those counter examples. But then they came back and haunted me, right? So I was like, how can I make sense of these cases? And that's when I realized that hope, right, really has two distinct senses, right? And this distinction is not typically drawn in the philosophy of hope, right? So my view now is that hope, on the one hand, can refer to hoping, right, as in action, right? So, and for me, hoping just is to desire something and to believe that its obtainment is possible, right? So, hoping in this sense can we can hope for mundane, ordinary things, right? Like I hope that restaurant is good, right? If you're going to a new restaurant, or you can, for a cancer patient, I hope that this treatment, right, this cure will work, right? So in both cases, we desire something that we believe is possible. But then I realized that there's another sense, right, in which we use hope, and that refers to the emotion of hopefulness, right? So being hopeful or being unhopeful, in my view, is very different from hoping, right? And the way to see that these are distinct senses is that it makes sense to say that I hope for something, but I don't feel hopeful about it. Right. So at the time I was writing my papers on hope. It was during the pandemic, right? So I used many COVID examples. So you one day you start feeling stuffy, right? You can't taste anything, and you have all the telltale signs of COVID. Right? We say things like, "I hope I don't have COVID," but despite hoping for this outcome, deep down inside you don't feel very hopeful. Right. So
this is a distinction you're making here.
That's right. So it's possible to hope for something and not feel hopeful.
If that's the case, if I have a desire for something, if I hope for something but don't feel hopeful about the outcome.
Right.
You talked about emotion. Does that lead to anxiety or depression, or can it lead? Because it sounds like the desire remains, right, but you're not feeling good about the possibility of attaining that desire.
Yeah. So how I understand hopefulness is how you think and feel about the possibility that whatever it is that you desire will obtain, right? So we have to be careful here because there are certain outcomes that have a very low chance of obtaining. Right. So in the literature on hope, many philosophers talk about cancer patients. Right. So imagine two cancer patients. This comes from the philosopher Adrian Martin, right? So Bess on the one hand, right? Bess and Alan, they both partake in this experimental drug trial. They both desire to be cured, right? And they both believe that there's only a less than 1% chance of success, right? So despite this belief in the low probability, right, Bess still hopes. You know, the terminology here is she hopes against hope, right? So despite a 1% probability, she still feels good about it, right? This is not my view. This is still Adrian Martin's view, right? According to that philosopher, the very possibility, right? Forget the fact that it's only 1%, but the very fact that it's possible is good enough, right, for her to display certain hopeful
So she's
syndromes.
that cancer patient is hopeful in your view.
That's right, right? Because of this sort of positive outlook, right?
Right.
Good thoughts and feelings about something, something's occurring despite a low probability.
Right.
But on the other hand, Alan, right, the other cancer patient, right, tends to focus on the low probability, right? Yeah, it's possible, but it's 1%, right? So he's consumed in some sense with negative thoughts and feelings
Right.
about this this outcome. So therefore, he is despairing.
Let's look at the next slide here.
Sure.
So hopelessness is opposed to hoping, not hopefulness. Is that a correct statement? I'm trying to paraphrase some of the things you've written here. We haven't used the word hopelessness,
Right.
but hopelessness is not having hope, right? It's not despair.
Yeah. So let me be clear. There's a lot of hoping.
Yeah, I know.
Right.
It's
So you know, my claim is that philosophers or hope theorists do not pay enough attention to the two distinct senses, right?
Right.
To hope and to feel hopeful. So you know, despair and hopelessness are typically regarded as the opposite of hope, right? And in ordinary language, we use these terms interchangeably, right? We treat them as synonymous, which is fine under certain circumstances. But in my view, I think it's important to distinguish between hopelessness and despair. And the reason is that if there are two senses in which we can understand hope, right, there corresponds two different senses in which we can lose hope, right? So on one hand, we can lose hope by not feeling hopeful, right? So going back to the Allen case, the despairing cancer patient, right? And this is something that I said that I say in my work that is somewhat controversial, right? Which is that, and you alluded to it before, which is that despair is actually compatible with hoping, right? So I actually don't think that hoping and despairing are opposites. And the reason is that Alan, despite not feeling very good, right, about the chances that he will be cured, he still desires to be cured, and he still believes that it's possible, right? So in that sense, he hopes for that outcome, but doesn't feel hopeful at all,
right.
right? So that's one sense in which we can lose hope, is that we cease to be hopeful, but we still desire the object, right? The other sense, you know, what I call hopelessness, right, is that you altogether cease hoping, right? You don't even hope for it anymore, right? So a person who is hopeless, right, hopeless, right, is less that hope, right? So if you ask this person, do you hope to be cured, right, they will say, no, I don't even hope for that anymore. I've given up.
Is that
in
resignation?
That is resignation.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, I would say that. Right?
So hopelessness is like resignation. But maintaining hope and not being hopeful is sliding into despair. Then
That's right. Right.
Yeah.
So if you most of my work is concerned with specific hopes, right? Not as hope or hoping or hopefulness as a general disposition, but if we were to talk in those terms and to look at this distinction between hopelessness and despair, the person who is in despair still desires certain things, right? It's just that they think that they don't feel good at all about any of them obtaining.
Yeah.
Right? So they have sort of a negative outlook on life.
Yeah.
Whereas the person who is hopeless, right? This person simply does not entertain any hopes whatsoever.
Yeah, I know you're not a psychotherapist, but it seems to me like your work could provide foundation in many practical applications: psychotherapy, grief counseling, religious counseling, and so forth. And,
Right.
So I want to think about that some more.
Okay.
But it sounds like that the possibilities here lie in giving us greater insight into what a person is feeling and how they're approaching these situations in their lives that call for hope.
Yeah.
Let's go to the next slide here, and maybe on to the next one. We've talked about despair, because I want to get to this next slide that one of my favorite movies,
Yes.
The Shawshank Redemption. I don't know if this applies to what you're talking about or not, but it's really a movie about hope, and I started rethinking some of the things in that movie after reading your articles. At one point, the two main characters, Red and Andy, are in prison, and they're discussing having the hope of being out of prison. And this is a quote from Red: "Hope is a dangerous thing. Hope can drive a man insane. It's got no use on the inside." That sounds to me like Red has the hope of being free, but has lost all hopefulness that he would ever achieve that freedom.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
That's interesting. I've thought about. Philosophers interested in hope and despair refer to this movie, this fantastic movie about hope and despair. I actually think that the Morgan Freeman character, Red, experience goes from being hopeful, right, to despairing, right, in the sense that after going up for review, right, for parole, he gets denied, right, several times, right, eventually to the point where he's hopeless, right, where he doesn't even hope for it anymore.
Yeah, that's in that last review by the board when he says, I don't care.
Right. So I think when people use the term hope, typically they have in mind hoping and being hopeful.
Yeah.
Right. Which is what Andy, right, and represents, I think, at the beginning.
Yeah.
Right. But then you see the two distinct ways in which this breaks down, right, or in which Red loses hope, right, is that he still hopes for it, but because he keeps being denied, his level of hopefulness, right, goes down. In other words, his despair increases, right, so much so that he actually no longer believes it to be a possibility, right, which we talked about before as a requirement for hope, right?
Yeah.
So when you cease to believe something is possible, you stop hoping for it, right? And in the literature, we typically refer to that as wishing, right? Because wishing, we can only wish about or wish for things that we perceive to be impossible.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that would be the difference between hope and wish.
That's right.
The perception that it's either possible or not.
That's right.
Yeah.
So if my child comes up to me and says, "I wish I can get an A in my next math test," right? He would be using the word, in in a mistaken way.
Right.
Because he really should be hoping for it,
There you go.
not wishing for it.
Yeah. Good.
Right.
Let's look at the next slide here, which gives us a different view from the same movie on hope. This is Andy in a letter. Remember, read, hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things. So Andy, in this perspective, I guess never lost hopefulness. Is he talking about hope here or hopefulness? It seems to me like he's talking about being hopeful, but you're the expert here, so I'll let you comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's unclear, right? I mean, I think he does shift back and forth, and I think this is why the distinction that I draw is important, and not just a sort of a game of semantics, right?
Right.
I think it makes a real difference, right? So in a similar context, some social political philosophers have become interested in despair, right? Especially given today's problems,
Right.
The idea is that let's say we hope for the eradication of oppression, right, or eradication of socioeconomic inequality. There's not much evidence. One can argue that that racism is going to be eliminated, right, or eradicated, right? So we actually have every reason, I think, to not be hopeful, right? But does this mean that we should give up hope, right? That's partly my claim here, right? Is that yes, right? We have every reason not to be hopeful. In fact, it would be irrational for us to be hopeful that racism will be eradicated, right? Nevertheless, we should still keep on hoping, right? Because it can serve many functions, right? Like who you are as a person depends partly on the kinds of things that you hope for, right? So you might say, even though I don't think racism will be eradicated in my lifetime, it's still important, right, for me to hope for it, because hoping is a reminder, right, of the work that we need to do, is a reminder of the sort of things that I value, right, or we value as a collective group.
You mentioned that functioning in certain ways, it could
That's right.
function at the community level.
Yeah, but if you collapse if you don't observe the distinction between hopefulness and hoping, right? As soon as you have no reason to be hopeful, you don't hope, right? This is why I think it's important.
Yeah. Well, this has caused me to rethink about this concept of hoping and hopefulness, and try to place it into a religious context. So maybe that can be the next thing you can come out with, is what kind of implications this has for religion and theology. So we can talk about that over the water cooler, maybe.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I mean,
I appreciate you coming on today. I think it's fascinating work, and I hope you will continue to work on this topic, because it has caused me to look at it in a more in-depth way. So,
are you hopeful?
Yeah, I am hopeful that I can continue.
But I mean, just to end on that note, many times that we use the word hope, we don't even have hopefulness in mind.
That's
right?
right.
We just say I hope, and if you ask, are you, just like I asked you, are you hopeful? And you're like, what? I mean, right? So.
Well, thank you for clarifying that for me.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for this week. Join us again next week on Religion and Life here at App TV. Until then, this is Ozzie Ostwald.